G'day and welcome back to another episode of the Rise and Form podcast. The podcast that has real talk about forming your character with actually useful psychology.
We're an unlikely duo of an American psychologist and an Aussie psychologist who both love theology and the science of change.
So grab a chair and a hot cup of coffee and open your heart and mind to the conversation.
Please follow us on Instagram and Spotify or Apple. That way you can find us easy and know when we post our next episode.
Now on to the show. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we have such a great episode with Susy Flory. I really liked getting to know her and just felt like we could talk all day. She's a New York Times bestselling author and memoir expert. She delves into the transformative power of kindness, one of the fruits of the Spirit. She has a rich background in journalism and education, and she's authored and co-authored over 14 books, including the acclaimed Thunder Dog, which tells the incredible story of a blind man and his guide dog during the 9/11 attacks. So we have a bit of a unique episode today because Susy's background in storytelling has so much crossover with mental health work and narrative therapy and some of the stuff that Andrea and I advocate for in becoming a healthy person. So many key takeaways today. One of them is that Susy believes that everyone has a unique story worth telling. And through sharing our narratives, we can foster connection and healing and growth. Susy's the director of West Coast Christian Writers Conference and the founder of Everything Memoir. You'll be able to see in this episode, Susy is passionate about empowering others to find their story, their voice, and share their experiences. So tune in as we explore how kindness not only shapes our own interactions, but also enriches our personal journeys through the art of storytelling.
My childhood dream was to be a psychologist.
Oh, no.
And when I met my husband, we were dating and, he started to talk about marriage. And I said, you're going to have to wait 6 or 8 years because I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to get my PhD. So that was my original dream.
Oh,
yes.
wow. I love it. Were you looking at going to Rosemead for your doctorate?
I was.
Uh-huh.
I was. I did an internship there. I was just looking at that, and then writing and literature. It just
Stole your
started
heart.
pulling me. Yeah,
Wow.
yes. So I feel like I'm still doing something similar.
The more I thought about you and your work and what you do, I was like, oh, we're going to get into this because in all therapies, I don't know any therapy that doesn't have narrative in it. We
Mhm.
always have some form of narrative. We have to understand story, right? And I can't wait to. Well, should we just
Let's
start
dive
and then?
in.
All right, maybe we'll just start with that first question about your story of your personal testimony or your transformation story or your story of faith and how that kind of sparked an interest in writing.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to meet you both, and delighted to be here to talk about
Yeah.
things we all care about. My own faith story started very young. I love Jesus. I feel like from birth, I don't know if that's possible, but I
Wow.
do feel like that. And when I was 5, I accepted, at my church, we had an invitation every week, from the
Mhm.
pulpit, and we would sing songs and songs and that when I was 5 years old, I just walked down that aisle,
Mm.
and it took a lot of courage because, you would go into a room with a counselor and talk through, the reason that you had walked forward. You
Mm.
also had to be standing up front after the service, and they would present you to the entire church.
Ooh.
Then people would come forward and shake your hand in a line. You would have like at 5
Wow.
years
That's a
old,
lot for a
5 years.
5-year-old. That's a
That's
lot.
yeah. What a procedure to go through.
Yes.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
no one was overlooked. If you came forward, there
Mm.
was going to be a process. And so
Mm.
Ah.
I knew
Mm.
that going in because I had seen that. We didn't have children's church. You would just be in church.
Mm.
Mhm.
And so I still decided I just felt a strong calling
Mm.
uh to make that decision to follow
Mhm.
Jesus and make it public. And then I knew I would go through baptism as well.
Mhm.
And that day, I still remember the lightness and the joy. I know we're not talking about joy, but
Mhm.
I felt
Mm,
a
mm.
sense of joy and like I was light in my shoes, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Wow.
Light, just a
Mhm.
lightness,
Man.
and felt very happy. And that feeling of faith has never left me.
Mhm.
Mm,
A friend of mine said she thinks for me it's like a gift because she has had doubts and struggles, and I've had my own struggles, but I've never doubted that there's a God and that he loves me. I have always felt
mm,
that, and
mm.
just it's my bedrock.
Mhm.
Wow.
So that's my story of faith is, coming as a
Mm.
little child and
Yeah.
that simple faith, and then
Yeah.
all the twists and turns
Yes.
That
that
come
all of
next in
our lives
life.
take.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, Susie, that's beautiful.
yeah.
And just
So I
the
think
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think my writing, to answer that last part of your
Yeah.
question,
Mm,
I think my writing and any work that I've done is just so that people can feel that faith and that
Mm.
joy.
mm,
Wow. I
mhm.
love that.
We just did the Monday Steep on joy, and it's so interesting. Like with Monday Steep's our Monday podcast that we'll take something from this and we'll steep it, and then we'll talk about it on Monday. So we
Mhm.
kind of get the extract from this, and Andrea's got it for this Monday. I
Mhm.
had it for last Monday. What you as you spoke on joy, I was like, that's what it is, right?
Mhm.
It's this like clarity and
Mm.
this deep sort of sense of being known and loved and having like this forward looking yearning for him,
Mm.
right? For God, that he knows you. It's so hard to describe, isn't it? It's like it's always been there with you.
Mhm.
And it's not just
Mhm.
happiness, it's something so much deeper.
Mhm.
Yeah, in my church and in some of the contexts I've been in faith-wise, they've described it as walking with God. Like, what is your
Mm,
walk like? How
mm,
is your walk going? And that always tripped me up because it felt much deeper and more
mm,
serious and more intense and just more
Mm.
than a
mm.
walk. I mean, as a kid, I remember thinking, what does that mean to walk with God? I don't really get it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes it is hard to describe it. Even a metaphor like walking just does not
Mm,
capture it.
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. No, I love the idea that you are also just wanting to share what you've experienced from God, from joy to faith, all of that, and share that through your writing. Um, and maybe this is a good time to even just ask specifically about your writing and how you use
mm,
the power of narrative and storytelling um, to influence Christian life, to influence faith
mm,
practices in other people.
mm,
Yeah, I think that I inherited a little bit of my mother's storytelling ability. So my mom was Irish. She was
Mm.
half Irish and she leaned into that Irish side very deeply.
mm-hmm,
And she had grown up with a father and an uncle and cousins that were all big storytellers in the forests of Arkansas. So they were
Mm.
mm,
just probably a step or two up from, what we might call a hillbilly.
Mhm.
Just they are country people, but they could tell a story. And so these men would gather around in the pool hall, bringing my mom as a baby, to lay her on the pool table. My grandmother didn't like it, but it's what my grandfather did.
Mhm.
And there would be storytelling, and it was
mm,
embroidered. It
Mm.
was probably
mm.
lying half the time, but they were good storytellers. And my mom
Wow.
Ooh.
picked that up and she could tell a story and you would just be riveted for that punchline. And as I got older and I became sort of a little more, intellectual and analytical, I'd always say, "Mom, that can't be true." And it didn't matter. It was the story was so
Yes.
good.
Mhm.
And you would feel all the emotions. So whatever the story was,
Mm.
you would feel the feeling that
Mm.
she is talking about.
Mm.
So I cannot do that. I am shy. I am awkward. I'm the kid kind of in the back of the room watching everything and not always joining in. But I did find that when I wrote, I could do some of that.
Mm.
And so I just began to realize, each one of us has our own particular giftings and the areas or the lanes that we do best in. So writing became that for me as a way of
Mm.
storytelling.
Mm,
Wow.
mm. I love that. I love that as an outlet. I think that's just an encouragement to others. It's like there's so many different ways that we can kind of express these gifts into there's like the saying goes, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's like, you're still
Mhm.
telling stories. You're just telling it through writing
Yeah.
and for everyone to embrace that, like they can't be exactly like someone, but can they take that essence and do it their way? And you're doing it your way. Which is
Mm.
amazing.
Oh, yeah. I'd
Mhm.
love to be a fly on the wall in that pool
I
hall.
know, me
That would have
too.
been just
Me
like just
too.
to that sounds fun. That just sounds fun, like, just to get around that, especially the Irish, because 'cause I'm Australian, and I thought I was Irish most of my life, and it turns out I'm Scottish. Same thing. Sorry if you're
Yeah, it
Irish or
is.
Scottish.
It is.
Same diff, right? Anglo-Saxon. But, just that sounds like a hoot. That just sounds like a really good time, and, the
Mhm.
art of being able to do that, man, just I don't have it either. You probably see I'm not very eloquent, and just the ability to be able to just kinda get those thoughts, and I've actually got a book back here somewhere, which is have you heard of The Moth? The
Yeah.
storytelling
Oh,
podcast?
I have a friend who won that competition.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's, like, right down your you'd be like a coach for that, right? I remember reading the book, and they said, basically how you get everything to this, like, crescendo, and that's what we're always looking for in the story, right? And they would say the leading word you would use for that crescendo is, "And my life was never the same after that day," or something like that,
Mm.
right? Some kind of like and then you're like, "Oh, what
What
happened?" And
happened?
yeah, goosebumps sort of thing.
Yeah.
In therapy, we were just sort of saying before, and in our work, we often have to talk about story, and because we've got to understand the beginning, the middle, and the end, of what's kind of happening in our own lives. And one of the I did a lot of child parent psychotherapy, and one of the ways they described how do you help a kid understand what happened when there was a trauma in their life? Well, you really want to help them understand it through a benevolent view, like
Mm,
a benevolent explanation of what happened, so that they can, because it's often so close to the truth, the benevolent explanation, and I've also had generous assumptions, like make generous
mhm,
assumptions about why dad did that, or why that happened to mum, or whatever that hard thing was.
mhm,
And so I'm curious about, for you in storytelling, when we embrace, the fruit of the spirit of kindness, which I read was translated as can be translated as tender concern. Um, how that can help change the way we perceive our own struggles and triumphs.
I did do my homework and I also looked up kindness.
mm.
Nice.
And
Tell us, yeah.
Yes.
the def- the definition I found also mentioned the word generosity, which I
Mm,
think
Ah,
you just
right.
mentioned
Mm,
when you were talking. And I teach a lot of memoir. I've
mm,
specialized in memoir in my writing over the years of different
mm,
forms. And when I teach it, I do teach this concept that uh, you don't label people or label the things that they've done. You tell your story, but you let the reader, kind of experience it and come to it with their own background and assumptions and biases, and they get to kind of try to figure it out. So we
mm,
trust the
oh,
reader,
wow.
but we
mm,
also are generous to those in the story who may not look like heroes, but look a little more like a villain. And we don't call them villains, but people who have, done you wrong, as like country songs say,
mhm,
Mm,
people who have not done what you hoped they would do. You felt neglected, maybe you were abused. There's so many, life is complicated, and so are these relationships. And so I do teach to try to be generous, not
mm,
excusing what happened,
mm,
telling the story of what happened as you remember it, but letting the reader kind of come along with you and experience these stories and have their own reactions. So that keeps it from
mm,
being a judgmental form of, revenge, I think,
mm,
sometimes that we
mm,
want. And to also look at our own participation if there was some. But it's
Wow.
going to be different for every story and different for every person. But this idea of, showing the good and the bad in whatever has happened and being generous to others, especially your
Wow.
family.
Yeah. I hear the integration there, like how a good, healthy person is integrated, and that it's not just one bias, right? It's kind of like I can also see my own participation in the thing, and that, yeah, that is, I mean, I would say that is therapy work, right? Writing your own memoir or writing memoirs, like that's just like so therapeutic and helpful, hopefully of, telling the story, but also like reflecting, you could say your reflexive capacity, not just what happened, but how did it feel? What meaning did you make of it? All of that kind of thing. Yeah, that's wonderful. What great work.
Yeah.
I do encourage them. I want you both to know that I do encourage them to seek help, therapy during the time that they are writing their memoir. So I'm not a trained therapist. I try to support them as much as possible, but it is, going through it is taxing. It's stressful as you relive it,
Yeah.
and they do
Yeah.
need a lot of support. So
Wow. Yeah.
the majority do. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, that sounds like just the makings, the foundations of like just trauma narrative work that we see of like being able to have what you're kind of sounds like you're just saying is like describe the experience, don't label it like you said, and it's to just give an open, you want to tell the whole story, all parts, all facets of it as much as you can, not just the one side, because that's often it's it's often the very worst of the worst. It doesn't mean the very worst of the worst did not happen, but in those times when we're like in survival mode, that's all we remember. In the art of like the trauma narrative is let's incorporate all aspects so that way, like you were saying, Abe, you can be integrated. And
Yeah.
I see so much kindness in that, of like this kind,
Yeah.
compassionate gracefulness, to be able to take that posture towards the reader, to be able to take that posture towards family members or people that were involved in something that, oh my gosh, that needs so much Holy Spirit. I can only imagine.
Yes. Yes.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're so biased, aren't we? And we just want to take, like, I mean, I know, like, wretched heart, man. Like, if something happens to me one day, like you get cut off in traffic, I'm like, this. If I was writing a memoir that day, right, it'd just be so negative, you know? And I wouldn't even think, and this is what my wife's often saying, but what about you? Like, what happened for you that day? Did you eat? And were you a little stressed about the kids and like that sort of stuff, like just the ability to see oneself in the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other aspect, I think, of this that goes right along with what we're talking about, this trauma narrative, I didn't have that language before, so thank you for that, is that when I speak to someone working on a story, a memoir or personal story of some kind, I remind them that or introduce this idea for the first time, you're creating a work of art. So you are not creating a history that you are giving every detail in the correct order and you're including it all. We're not doing that. We're writing a work of art, something that's never existed, which is difficult. And we're taking a step back and trying to look a little more objectively, the best that we can, at the story that we're presenting to a reader. So we're making all these choices, these artistic choices in how we're going to tell the story, what we're going to tell, what we're not going to tell, what we speed up, what we slow down and focus on. And that really helps them have a little space to sort of look at these events
Wow.
through different eyes, because you're looking at it through a reader's eyes. And when I'm mentoring them and coaching them and talking to them on the phone, reading their work, I'll try to serve as that reader sometimes. And just, that's a process throughout the whole year, is to be able to see it through someone else's eyes, which seems to be very powerful and healing for people.
Wow.
Yeah, which I didn't really intend that. I intended it
Mhm.
as, "This is gonna make a better reading experience," I'm trying to be
Mhm.
practical,
Yeah.
Yes.
but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
We're gonna
I'm
sell this.
seeing
Yeah.
that you want people to read the whole book and not
Yeah.
put it
Mhm.
down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
Mm.
do find that that aspect of it does seem to help people.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's a work of
Yes.
art. It kinda yeah, it gives that freedom, and I think that's a good
Mhm.
exercise for people too, like, just even outside of writing a memoir, like, can you try to see this situation or whatever from someone else's eyes? Can you tell the story from someone else's eyes? And I think that could engender a lot of this kind of, like, softness that could come out and perspective giving that can help us in
Oh,
really hard
yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we sometimes have resistance to that, right? Because we can feel very precious about our own narrative, and when someone
Mhm.
asks us to think about it differently, there's like these
Mhm.
gates, right? Of like, I don't want to do it. I don't even want to think about it any other
Yep,
way.
yep.
And I think there's an adaptive reason for that. One
Mhm.
of them is we're suspicious of any information that's not our own,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
Because if we consider it from any other point of view, it might be, what if you're wrong? What if that perspective's not wrong and I was right? Or like,
Mm.
you know, like if you're lost in the forest and someone says, I think it's that way, and you think it's the other way, it's like, who am I going to trust here? So I can imagine that's quite a lot of tension you have, Susie, in those conversations about like trying to even just suggest like there might be another way of looking at that story
Yeah.
or, yeah.
Ye
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that where I've learned something about how to do that is through horses. So,
Mm,
my
Mm.
dad was a Texas cowboy.
mm,
I grew up with horses, so everything I know about horses and interacting with them is very intuitive, but
Mm.
horses are very intuitive,
Mhm.
and
mm,
so they can, this is my simple self-explaining, horses, they can read your mind.
mm,
And I think that when you get to know horses better, you
Mm.
can sort of read theirs. There's this deep bond because they
Mm.
are herd animals and they have a
mm,
herd intelligence where they can pick up emotion, maybe body language, maybe energy. I don't know what it is.
mm,
I'm just an amateur, but
mm.
it is a true thing. And when you become good with horses, there's this intuitive partnership when you ride
Wow.
that they can read your mind and they will go where you want them to go
Mm.
with maybe a pressure of a heel, maybe just a turn of your body or a shift of weight, or maybe not even any of that. They just know, and you know
Wow.
them. So you can predict what they're
Mm.
going to do. These are the best kind of writers.
Mm,
And I believe that I've been able to use that, some of that ability, which was honed over years, with my dad kind of showing me how to do things in relationships where I was collaborating with people on their stories.
wow.
Mm.
So, we're walking through these difficult, I mean, heartbreaking things, when we come to that point of the story and knowing when to advance, when to pull back,
Mm,
when to push, when
mm,
to, embrace,
Mhm.
when to pray with them,
mm,
whatever
Mm.
is called in the situation. I
mm.
feel like I learned that from horses, if that
Wow.
makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, it really
It
does.
does, it does. There's
Yeah.
equine
Yeah.
therapy for a reason. I've never done it,
Yeah.
but I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
there's
Mm-mm.
therapy with horses,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so that's a
Yeah.
beautiful
It's healing.
yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
was just gonna say, so I use that in my writing.
Mm.
I use that in my teaching and mentoring, and I think it's a part of storytelling.
Mm.
That
Mm.
timing, that
Mm.
sense, because what are you doing? You're just having a conversation with your reader in a story.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're talking into their head, their heart, their soul.
Hmm.
When do you move forward? When do you rest? When do you bring in something spiritual? I think
Yeah.
it's that relationship side of it.
Yeah.
Mm, mhm.
Well, and I think too, like, part of me wants to ask for a story. So this is not on the questions, but I'm curious, like, because I can see like just like that posture of like really being in tuned, and again, I can see kindness all in that too.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, I don't know, is there a story that comes to mind when you that kind of exemplifies like going with that flow, and maybe even exemplifies
Mm,
that kindness that you, or any of the other fruits that you've had to like embody in order to do that, to sit and
mhm,
stay in pace with someone like that.
Yeah, I had to really learn how to gain people's trust,
Mhm.
which I know that's, so much of the work that
Yes.
you do.
mm,
And I had to do it quickly because when I'm working with someone, especially someone who's a busy, person, got a lot going on in their lives, maybe they're famous, that type of thing. You have to gain their trust very quickly. And it's done
Mhm.
for the purpose of the story and the work. And there's always levels of why you're doing it. It's not
mhm,
just because you need a paycheck.
Mhm.
mm,
And so there was one situation where I was dealing with a very distinguished, accomplished person. If I gave you his name, his Wikipedia entry is
Mhm.
multiple pages.
Mhm.
mhm. Tell
He's
us. Just kidding. It's okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's won all these accolades. I mean, if you looked at, books I've written, you might be able to guess. But he's
Sure.
won
Mhm.
all these accolades. He's been famous. He's done all these things. He's not really a household word except in the areas where he's really achieved.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he had this childhood background where he had gone to a missionary school for a while. So his family was
Mm,
really not traditionally religious. And he ended up in this missionary school in another country. And he had a situation there that um, confused him and hurt him. And he associated that with Christianity after
Mhm.
that. Like I had this thing happen. It wasn't abuse, it was just something he saw that didn't make sense and
mm,
was the authority in charge was harsh about it,
Mhm.
this, his feeling.
mhm,
So
mhm,
he always felt hurt that, this church doesn't understand me. They didn't understand about this thing. And I just don't feel like I can connect.
Mhm.
And so he was telling me the story. I was asking him questions. We were just kind of going down this conversation. It's a
mm,
conversational path.
mm,
And all of a sudden I just felt the hurt there.
Mhm.
mm,
And so we just stopped and talked about it as people.
Mhm.
I
mm,
shared some of mine. I ended up, what we might say, my Baptist background, witnessing to him,
mm,
just
mm.
talking about spiritual things. The
Mhm.
door
Yeah.
had opened.
Yeah.
And so that was an example, I think, of just you're having a conversation, whether you're working, collaborating with someone on some kind of project,
Yeah.
Mm,
teaching, writing, there are deep hurts going back decades for
yeah.
people,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and you might be just the right person at the right time
Mhm.
that can get to speak into it because you're having a conversation. So I'll
Yes.
never
Mhm.
forget that moment. I still remember it,
Aw.
so
Yeah.
Aw.
clearly.
Yeah, that's a great question, Andrea. Just like,
Mhm.
because as you shared that, like, just kind of settled into this is what we're really talking about. It's
Mhm.
like that, you were doing the work of the person and horse type relationship, like just being so in tune and so kind and aware of that person enough to notice that change, right? We would say we notice the affect, right? We notice the change. But I think like in every relationship, this is what we are trying to maybe talk about in Rise and Form, like is just to be, especially at the moment with the election coming up and tension anyway. I mean, we didn't need uh, an election to have tension, did
Right.
we? It was already here, but just how we can be like that, like what you were like in that
Yeah.
moment, sort of just slowing down,
Yeah.
being human, having a
Mhm.
conversation. That sounds actually really nice,
Mhm.
where we're actually talking, you know, and listening,
Yeah.
noticing.
Yeah.
And it hasn't, I want to be honest because I don't want to make myself sound like I'm an expert at this. I am really kind of a hard-headed, hard-charging person.
Mm,
Mm.
That's
mm-hmm,
why I do a lot of the things I've done and, have had some success because I just push forward. I'm kind of
mm,
project driven.
Mhm.
mm,
And so this has been a huge learning process for me that the reason I'm doing these writing projects, the reason I'm mentoring people is not for achievement. It's not for book sales.
mm,
It is because of the
Mhm.
people. The
Mm.
people are why I'm doing this. So I
mm,
just have to say I've had plenty of
mm,
failures
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm.
still learning
Oh,
this.
yes. Yeah, thanks for that,
Ah,
Susie. As soon as Andrea asked that question, I remembered my first failure of that. I was like,
uh,
I lost one of my first clients because I wasn't reading the room and I wasn't
mm,
in tune and I didn't say let's pause here and like do
mm,
something and I remember going, what happened? And as I look back, it was that. So yes, many failures,
yeah.
right, in this journey.
Those all.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think even in that, like, I think that when our personality slants one way and we can show up in a different way, I think that that shows like the spirit is moving in those times. So like even though you're like I'm stubborn, like kind of really focused, goal oriented, it's like in this moment like and in these moments you're able to be attuned and I think that that shows, the moving of the Holy Spirit in those times outside
Yeah.
of maybe what would be the normal and that you could be sensitive enough to
Mhm.
that to, like, go with it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, not I, but Christ in me.
Mhm.
Like that's your sort of natural disposition is to kind of get after it. It sounds like Susie, like project but you're
Yeah.
saying this more personable side. What you're deeply interested in
Yeah.
is the story, the person, what their lived experience. Um,
Mhm.
and I was wondering, maybe if we just jump into your passion for studying women writers because you've written about some of the most influential women in history, and it sounds like you've done some. Have you just finished your dissertation on this?
I'm
Or
in it right now.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, trying
I know.
trying to finish trying to finish before Christmas time. So yes,
Okay.
right in the
Yeah.
middle of
You
it.
got
Uh-huh.
this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes,
Mhm.
before Christmas. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That'll be a great
motivation.
Christmas present.
Right.
Yeah, and so I'm guessing like this is what you're sort of talking about, like, these high achieving, very focused women who have really changed history or changed the world. And it must have been your book, your 2009 book.
So long, status quo. That
That's
one,
the
the
one.
women who changed
Yeah.
the world. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I read a little bit about that where you said you were chilling. You're kind of like relaxing and then you're reading about these incredible women who just got out there and got out of the status quo. So I don't know what I'm really asking about that, but I'm guessing, what's happened for you and
Mhm.
why is this so interesting to you? And I guess enough to still be doing dissertations on it. And,
Mm.
it's a passion of yours.
So because I have this I'm a competitive person and I want to always push forward and I like to compete against myself, but also be up there with the leaders, right? The leaderboard. And I'm not always, for example, my husband beats me at Wordle and Scrabble all the time. And he is dyslexic. So it's the
Oh.
biggest smackdown
Wow.
for me
Yes.
as a writer, a word person to
Yes.
consistently beat me.
Ah.
It's so good for me.
Mm,
So, when you are competitive and hard driving, God's going to humble you so many
Mhm.
ways. And that
Mhm.
has happened to me. But one way that it has been positive in my life is that I always want to know what I don't know. I always want to know what other people know that I don't know yet. I always want
mm,
to be in the conversations that are going on. I'm not one to sit and be told what to do. I want to know what's going on
mm,
at the table where the decisions are
Mhm.
being made. Even if I
wow.
can't be there, I just want to know
Yeah.
what's going on. So I
Mm,
think that drives me in my
Mm.
scholarship. And I
mm,
think that has made me be interested, not just on the level of, I want to know these women's stories and know more about the women of the Bible.
mm,
It's more like, what don't I know? Why don't I know that?
Mm.
And what do people not know that I might be able to figure out? So that's
Mm.
kind of that pushing
wow.
that happens.
Mm,
And my first day of my master's degree, this was at Northern Seminary. I was 53 years old, walking in with just shaking and nervousness. And my professor was Scott McKnight. And the first day, for some reason, I don't know why I don't even remember the context. He was talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus, one of the most prominent women of the New Testament with Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus. And he said, "So, who do you think, how do you think we got the story of Mary? How do you think we know all these details about Jesus's birth and about some of the stories where Mary is very prominent? I said, how do you think we know that? Because Mary was telling her story.
Mm.
And I just had like this giant light
Whoa,
bulb.
yeah.
And, and I
Mm.
thought she was telling her story. She had a voice.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that just set me off on this adventure of looking at women in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. And now I'm going back to the beginning of writing and looking at women writers and
Mm.
communicators, and then going up through the early church. So it's just the
Mm.
drive to want to know, to want to
Mm,
find out, and to tell these stories to encourage women that we've always been
Mm.
talking, we've always been writing, we've
mm,
always been part of the conversation.
Yeah.
yeah.
That excites me.
And I think there is so much like I keep going back to kindness. You guys see me doing that. But there's so much kindness in telling somebody else's story, and like when they can't, especially people who have passed and like being able to tell their
Mhm,
stories
mm, mhm,
and to be able to share those to be an encouragement to others is like, doing for others, just a beautiful act of
mm.
of generosity in that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. You're right, 'cause I mean, we know the Gospels were written by men, but
Mhm.
how did they know, right, that what really happened? What was the subjective experience of Mary? It was through her sharing that verbally with them. And I know she's
Mhm.
got a gospel as well. I'm not sure if she actually wrote it. You'll probably be able to school me on this. The Gospel of Mary's got some weird
Oh,
things
really?
in it. So I don't
I
think
haven't
it's
heard of that.
actually Mary's. But
Yeah.
yeah, which it didn't make the
Didn't make the cut.
66 books. Yeah. But yeah, any thoughts on that, just on that part itself, that it was told she must have been sharing that verbally or narrative. I know we're getting into seminary stuff here for a
Mhm.
second. Um,
We're
and
getting dirty.
yes, let's go into the weeds.
Uh, I even though I'm kind of a nerd, I'm still a storyteller. So that means I always
Mm,
try to, tell the story.
yes.
So that, the Gospel of Mary definitely might have, come down from things that she said or what people remembered, but it's not considered as primary as the Gospels. It's just sort of something that
Yep.
happened later.
Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, the Gospels were written within the lifetimes of witnesses.
Mm,
And so that's what makes them so convincing that people were still alive, still telling their stories.
mm,
And Mary, is probably one of them that was alive for a while. I mean, we know about her in, the book of Acts that she was
Mhm.
there in the early church, maybe in Ephesus, we're not really sure, telling her
mm,
story. She was there from cradle to grave and beyond for Jesus. And so they acted as people who could say, yes, it was that way. No, it wasn't that way. So for
mm,
me, the Gospels are stories of collaboration. It
mm,
is
Mm.
not a writer going away, which rarely happens. Most writers collaborate on some level,
mm.
whether it's with editors, co-authors, writers group, a writing partner. There's just so many areas and levels of collaboration, and this is true for the Gospels as well. So
Mm.
Mm.
while they have a name on them, they're stories of
Yeah.
collaboration. So that's
Mm.
what I'm
Oh, it's
trying to sort of,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
get at.
Mm.
And
Yes.
that these collaborators are part of, they're the
Mhm.
witnesses and part of the stories. And that's why these stories are so
Mm.
good, so vivid, so alive, is that
Yeah,
these
yeah.
people were telling their stories, whether they were writing, speaking. We know that oral transmission was considered more authoritative
Mm.
than written at that time
Mm,
Mm.
mhm.
because you had this culture of rhetoric and
Yeah,
debate, trained
Mhm.
speakers. So if
yeah,
you had the option to read something or hear somebody say it, you would always go for the
yeah,
oral transmission.
Mm.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Mhm.
they were considered above the
Interesting.
level of written, which
Yeah.
to us today is opposite.
Yeah.
Today
Yeah.
we hold written things in higher esteem. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah, if I can quote it, cite it, then that's good. But yeah, if you said it, I'm still like, if people say stuff, I'm like, let me fact check you. Like,
Let me look down
yeah,
at
What's that one we've been using? Perplexity.ai,
yeah.
Andrea. Man, that's got some good stuff.
I know. Glad to have
But you
that.
never get tone, right? You have to
Mm,
that's where Susie
mm,
comes in with like this is how you're going to kind of create tone in the text. But
yeah.
um yeah, that's powerful. It just made me think of part of kindness as well, which is kindness isn't about you just, it's about self-compassion, right? And kindness towards oneself, but it's so much about other as well,
Hmm.
isn't it? And so like to really tell your own story and is to participate in narrative, is to participate in everybody around us story.
Hmm.
And that's why the gospels were so beautiful, like because they were a collaboration of that. Our pastor just spoke on rebuilding the wall in Nehemiah, and how it was just this collaboration. I think it's Nehemiah chapter 3. It's just like one,
right.
yeah, one after the other working together to rebuild the wall, rebuild the story of the Israelites.
Mm.
So it just kind of reminded me of that partnership that we have with all of us all together. And that Abe's selfish little story in the corner would actually just be terrible. Like it just wouldn't be worth reading because
That's
it'd
right.
be way better in a group to like
Mm.
say, how did you experience that? Or
Yeah. I'm also interested in the collaboration a writer, a storyteller has with the Holy Spirit. So when you're walking with God, when you are in relationship with God, when you have that faith, He is then working in you and through you. So
Mm.
collaboration to me also means, we talk about the scriptures being inspired. So this idea of
yeah,
collaboration.
Mhm.
yes.
And I imagine in
Oh, that's
therapy,
good.
I don't do therapy with people, but there is a collaboration, a collaborative aspect to that. You're working
Yeah,
Mhm.
together in this relationship.
Yeah.
yeah,
So I think that's really important when we look at these stories of women in the
yeah.
Bible, old and new, that there was a lot of collaboration going on,
Mhm.
and it doesn't
Mm.
always make it into the credits.
Mhm.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah. How do you encourage that now, like that kind of sensitivity to the Holy Spirit, if that is what the writers want to do? Like, how do you encourage that in them, um, as you guide them?
Yeah, so I've been working on it for a while as I've learned and, growing in this area, studying it. But one thing I'm doing with my nonprofit, I have a nonprofit that helps Christian writers called West Coast Christian Writers,
Mhm.
is we're developing a program called Theology for Writers. And
Mm.
this is one of the concepts that we're talking about is, what does it mean to be inspired by the Holy Spirit as a
Mhm.
writer? We look at it in the Bible. What does it mean for your own writing? How can we yield to more of that,
Yeah.
the
Mm.
Spirit?
Mm.
And what does that look like for each
Oh.
person? It's going to look different for a novelist, a
Mm.
Mhm.
children's
Mhm.
writer, somebody
Ooh.
doing YA, it's going to look different for each person. And nobody wants to get preached at anymore. And, when you're reading a book,
Yeah.
Mhm.
so that's why storytelling is so powerful because you don't
Mm.
feel like you're getting preached at.
Mm.
And how does
Mm.
that all work? So that's one way that I'm, working on it is it's going to be a series of classes, workshop, things like that for people.
Ooh.
Yeah, that sounds
That sounds
amazing.
awesome. Yeah, I would wanna know once that comes out, like, I'm not even a
Yes.
writer, but
Yeah. I wanna be a
I
writer.
wanna be I wanna be at the table.
Yes, me too, yes. Yeah, are men
All are
allowed to be Susie?
welcome.
Okay, okay, good. Oh, that sounds amazing, and you used that word yield in there, I was like, it's like I just keep hearing that word, in so much of our work in Rise and Form and in just different circles about whatever whatever that is, that disposition to let go, and really just like, yeah, sink into what the story's doing or what the Holy Spirit's encouraging you to write, and how you have to really like surrender almost to that. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Mm.
I think that's so true. I think when I start out on a story, I have a starting vision for
Mm.
what I think it
Mm,
is. And maybe
mm,
I think it's inspired, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I have an idea for what I want this story to be. But as I start and go along, and especially if I've prayed over it, I've asked for an
Mm.
anointing, I'm, consciously trying to yield.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm better at it than others for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But there is a sense that this story is taking on a life of its own. And you
Mm.
do hear novelists talk about this, like my characters all of a sudden did this thing, and this new character came into my story. And it does
Mm.
happen with creativity.
Mm.
But I think when you're yielding to the Spirit, there is this feeling that God is working and calling you into new directions, and it's becoming deeper, more complex. Threads are coming together.
Mm.
Mm.
I think any creative person can experience that, but there is an extra dimension, when you are in contact with the Spirit, and
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
you begin to come up with ideas, connections. The story just takes off and goes different ways than you thought it was going to go. So
Mm.
being
Wow.
open to that, letting
Mm.
go,
Mm.
as you're saying, I think,
Mhm.
letting go of your original vision, and
Mm.
going with
Mm.
where you're feeling led. I think there's
Mm.
a lot of fun in that. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's lessons in life, what you just said. Like, that is that not life, right? The
Mhm.
story kind of took I didn't plan that to
Mhm.
happen. I didn't have any control over that.
Mhm.
And then that thing, and then this new character
Mhm.
came into my life. And it's so like how it really is, isn't it? But what
Mhm.
we
It
don't do
is.
is often just let go,
Mhm.
and accept. But I thought parenthood was going to be like this.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's not. They don't treat you like you thought they would.
Mm.
Right?
It's very,
Well, accept it, right? And
Yeah.
and and yield to it. But then guess what? You've got the kindness of the Holy Spirit with you,
Yeah.
guiding you through all of that. And so I love like just taking that, like again, extracting it to
Yes.
like we could just apply that to our lives. Like even just this afternoon, or if you're listening now, like for the next hour, what does that look like?
Mhm.
To just yield
Mhm.
and to just be open to whatever is going to happen, rather than try to control it all. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
like that it kind
yeah.
of bridges together these two things we've been talking about, the collaboration and then this piece of yielding. And it's like you in order to collaborate, you have to yield. You have to let, the Holy
Mm,
Spirit kind of come in and write. It's going to get written anyways. Like you're not going to write your whole story. Like it's going to unfold, So like allowing that
mhm,
to happen. And this is right. It's so interesting. This is a right along with this. I was at an event yesterday, and the pastor was saying, like, notice where the spirit is growing fruit, and it was like this development event. And it was like, we can have one
mm,
idea, but where is the spirit growing fruit? And so I like the challenge you gave, Abe, of like,
mm,
what if we just
mm,
take an hour and just notice? Like, let's just notice what is happening and unfolding before us. Where are the places where there's fruit? It may not be where we expect it to
mm,
be. Um,
mhm.
but oh, does that create such
Yeah.
beautiful art?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I
Mhm.
don't think we talked enough about that, Susie, about like our story as a work of art. But I loved that idea,
Mhm.
that really just to see that in the creative process it is, and also like according to God it is,
Mhm.
like we're His creation, and
Mhm.
so we are a work of art, and our lives are art,
Yeah.
and um, gosh, that's important to remember, isn't it? Like coming back to just the generous kindness
Mhm.
that we can have towards ourselves about that.
Mhm.
Um, I guess we're probably going to have to wrap up
Yeah.
around here. I heard a lot of things about awareness, just like just so much about being aware, like being awake and noticing and being self-aware, and in this. So I really like that. That's something I kind of wanted to think more on as maybe I'm just hearing it because I need to be more self-aware. but, but I was really like kind of hearing that in what you were saying, and I appreciated that,
Mm.
Susie.
Mhm.
And maybe we can just end with, you've got so many different hats you wear, and
Mhm.
mentor, preacher, memoir. Is that a memoir mentor? Is that what you call it? Or support?
yes. Yeah.
Preacher,
Teacher. Mhm.
author, leader, student. And so I'm just wondering, with all of the things you do, what your encouragement could be to inspiring writers and also just our listeners in their lives, in their creativity, in their relationships. Yeah, any habits or ideas or thoughts you would like to share?
I think that because I have struggled with being competitive and with the idea of achievement, which I think is rewarded in our culture, and being meek and humble and kind is often not rewarded or overlooked. I think that is the thing that is really kind of my life goal right now.
Mm,
The reason behind well, a lot of what I do is just supporting others who are writing, storytelling, studying, whatever they're doing in my community, and just coming along underneath and beside them to support them rather than using them as a stepping stone, which is easy
mhm,
to do when you're,
Mhm.
a forward motion
Mhm.
person, not competing with others, not calling attention unduly, to anything that I'm doing. And that means not being in front, not claiming success. So that's an ongoing
mm,
thing
mm,
for me is just to reject this, I think, value that is saturated in our culture because I've been other places where it's not the same. There are
Mhm.
other
mm,
cultures that do not do that the same way that Americans do. We really
Mhm.
do glorify, this entrepreneurship, this high
mhm,
achievement.
Mhm.
So I think that's it for me is
mhm,
Mm.
is community, being communal about our faith,
Mm.
being communal about our work, our ministry, bringing others along with you.
Yeah.
mm.
Mm. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom and just little glimpse into just how you walk alongside other people in a very therapeutic way, and
Yeah.
from the different roles that you have too, like, I can just see God using you to work in people's lives and help
Yeah.
help change and grow them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, thanks, Susie. That was amazing. And I was like, do you need more work? Because I could send so many people to you to do memoir writing, but it would be
Yeah.
with this like therapeutic intervention.
Mhm.
Um, there is that group that does Write to Heal. And I'm not sure. I think it might be a little new agey or something. I don't know much about it, but I've had some clients that have done it and said it's fantastic.
Mm.
Um, but is there anything that we could connect our listeners with for you? I know you're saying I'm not trying to like promote myself and do any of
We'll
that, but we
promote
would love
you.
to. We'd love to. We would really love to. Anything that, yeah. I mean, of course, your website and your fantastic books. But yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say if you're a writer who's looking for community,
Mhm.
West Coast Christian Writers is where we try to do that,
yeah,
and we're trying to grow and all kinds of support, from grants to, you know, a foundation, things like that, and conferences. If you are looking for help with memoir, I have uh, a private Facebook group called Everything Memoir that has 30 or 40 free videos, just videos, handouts,
Nice.
help, that people can access, just
Mhm.
step by step walking them through memoir, all the aspects that we've talked about and more. And then if you're interested in my scholarship and women's voices in the Bible, specifically the New Testament, just keep an eye on my website and as I go along with that. So
yeah, good. Is
Awesome.
that susiflory.com or?
yes, yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we'll make sure we put that up there. And thanks for listening to the show, everyone. Make sure you like us on Instagram. No, you don't like us on Instagram. Everyone, you know what
But
we're
you
saying.
should like us on Instagram and follow us.
Follow us on
You should go
Instagram.
above and beyond.
Yeah. Follow us on Spotify or Apple and tell your
Share our
friends.
content.